Hollywood gleams like a promise until it turns savage. Behind red carpets and trophies lie betrayals, confessions, and secrets that shattered careers. Worshipped overnight and abandoned without warning, whose fall was the cruelest? Who did the crowd recast as a villain? Which name will leave you stunned? Brace yourself. The dark side of fame starts now. 30. Ellen DeGeneres. Ellen DeGeneres once seemed to embody kindness. With her infectious laugh, quick wit, and groundbreaking visibility for LGBTQ+ voices, she turned a daytime talk show into a cultural touchstone. She danced her way into the nation's affection, earned Emmys, and a reputation as television's warmest presence, proof, it seemed, that you could be both funny and good. Then the narrative shifted in 2020, when reports emerged describing a toxic workplace under her leadership, employees alleging bullying, intimidation, and emotional mistreatment. The revelations felt like betrayal. How could the person who built an empire on the mantra, "Be kind," preside over cruelty? The backlash was swift and severe. Viewership dropped, sponsors pulled back, and the image of the beloved host cracked into something harder. Her public apology failed to fully mend the damage, and when the show ended, she tried to depart on her own terms, but the record had already been rewritten. Once a pioneer for acceptance, she now stands as a reminder of how quickly public goodness can feel performative and how light-hearted charm can conceal deeper problems. 29. Demi Lovato. Demi Lovato rose from Disney alum to mainstream pop powerhouse, known for emotional anthems like Skyscraper and Sorry Not Sorry, and for a candid voice about survival. Her willingness to speak about trauma, personal struggles, and mental health made her feel like a rare, frank presence in a world of curated images. Over time, however, that same openness strained under constant scrutiny. Repeated relapses, very public breakdowns, and headline-grabbing conflicts wore on the public's patience. What began as empathy for a wounded artist morphed for some into suspicion of manipulation. When she publicly clashed with other performers, provoked controversy over cultural insensitivities, and repeatedly retooled her persona in the glare of publicity, the cast of her story shifted from brave survivor to attention-seeking figure in many eyes. The backlash was amplified by social platforms and tabloid cycles. Even longtime defenders admitted fatigue. Instead of steady recovery, comebacks often read as performances and confessions as calculated moves. Now her career sits in an uneasy middle ground, still gifted, still influential, but for many emblematic of how raw vulnerability can be commodified and how personal struggle can be turned into spectacle. 28. Jared Leto. For years, Jared Leto cultivated an air of enigmatic artistry, an Oscar winner, chameleon actor, and frontman, whose strange charisma felt like intentional mystique. Roles in films such as Dallas Buyers Club and Requiem for a Dream showcased his commitment to transformation, while his band, 30 Seconds to Mars, earned a fervent, almost religious following. To many, he was Hollywood's eccentric visionary, a figure who blurred the line between performance and persona. Over time, that aura began to fray. On the set of Personal Despair Squad, reports alleged he sent unsettling gifts and staged shocking antics that he defended as method acting, while some cast and crew called the behavior abusive. Online accusations followed, claiming he pursued underage admirers and exploited young fans who idolized him. What once read as fearless devotion to craft started to look like boundary crossing and manipulation. The reaction was gradual but fierce. Critics and audiences who once lauded his risk-taking started to dampen their praise. His band drew criticism for insular, cult-like dynamics. Interviews and public moments were often read as arrogance. The fascination that once shielded him gave way to suspicion. Today, Leto remains a divisive figure, admired by some for his talent, by others viewed as a cautionary example of when theatricality tips into troubling conduct. 27. James Corden. There was a moment when James Corden seemed untouchable. His British charm, comic timing, and viral carpool karaoke bits made him a global television favorite. He shared duets with pop icons, bantered with world leaders, and cultivated the image of the approachable everyman who loved to make people laugh. The industry welcomed him warmly. Slowly, the facade started to fracture. Whispered accounts surfaced stories of arrogance, demanding behavior, and harsh treatment of staff and service workers. The affable persona that had propelled him to stardom began to feel like a crafted performance. Clips and anecdotes of him snapping at restaurant staff and acting imperious in public spread quickly, reshaping the public narrative. Criticism intensified. Ex-employees, viewers, and peers recounted episodes of temper and entitlement, and the gap between his on-camera warmth and off-camera behavior became a talking point. When he addressed the controversy on air, many found the response unconvincing, another staged moment rather than a sincere reckoning. The figure once celebrated for bringing joy now carried the stigma of inauthenticity. In recent times, he has stepped back from the constant glare, but the controversy remains part of his legacy. It serves as a reminder that charm can mask contradictions, and that a carefully maintained persona can collapse quickly when the private and public selves no longer align. 26. Lea Michele. Lea Michele rose quickly from theater stages to prime time, her theater training and powerful voice making her a breakout star on the hit show that showcased musical teens. She embodied drive and ambition, the polished example of someone who had worked her way up and was determined to shine. As fame grew, stories from former collaborators began to surface, painting a very different picture. Cast and crew recounted interactions that they described as mean-spirited and controlling, alleging instances of racial insensitivity and a pattern of behavior that made sets tense and people feel dismissed. Social media amplified those accounts, and admiration for her talent gave way to widespread dismay. Her initial response did little to quiet the storm. What she offered as contrition read to many as carefully worded and impersonal, and subsequent remembrances kept adding to the narrative. Over time, the image of a gifted performer was eclipsed by a reputation for being difficult and unkind. The actress who once played acceptance and inclusivity on screen now found herself associated with exclusion off it. Today she continues to work and perform, but the controversy has left a lasting mark. For a lot of viewers and industry insiders, her legacy is complicated. The impressive talent remains, but so does the memory of conduct that suggested fame did not make one exempt from the consequences of hurting others. 25. Jonah Hill. Jonah Hill's rise looked like the dream arc every young comic imagines. From breakout scenes in Superbad to unexpected turns in Moneyball and The Wolf of Wall Street, he proved himself capable of shifting from broad humor to intense drama. As he trimmed down, moved behind the camera, and spoke openly about therapy, he recast himself as a serious artist and a public proponent of emotional health and accountability. Yet cracks appeared beneath that new persona. In 2023, leaked private messages from a former partner painted a different picture, behavior framed as boundary setting that many read as controlling and emotionally coercive. The contrast between his public teachings and the allegations felt stark, and the careful narrative he'd built fractured quickly. The reaction was swift and severe. Fans recoiled, colleagues kept distance, and past interviews were reinterpreted through a lens of contradiction. His muted response only amplified criticism, leaving judgments to proliferate online. Now Hill is seen as a conflicted figure, immensely talented and outspoken about care, yet accused of actions that betray those very principles. His story is a reminder that reputation can shift as quickly as a leaked message. 24. Doja Cat. Few performers have climbed the charts as quickly as Doja Cat. With viral songs, a genre-mixing approach, and an online persona that felt electric, she became one of pop's most discussed figures. Her mix of wit, swagger, and controlled chaos made her seem disarmingly authentic, a new kind of pop star, unafraid to be messy. but the same streak that felt bold began to look reckless. Flippant remarks aimed at supporters and derisive comments about the very communities that elevated her slowly eroded goodwill. When old chatroom posts surfaced showing her making racist jokes, the reaction was fierce. What had been framed as bracing honesty now read as entitlement. The controversy kept unfolding. Interviews and social posts repeatedly lit new fires. She declared she did not love her fans, shaved her head during a live stream, and more often chose defiance over contrition. She is still a major artist, but her career is shadowed by contradiction, celebrated for creativity, criticized for conduct, a reminder that in the social media era, fame can unravel in public, post by post. 23. Russell Brand. He emerged as the untamable genius of British comedy, razor-tongued, theatrical, and equal parts charm and chaos. On stage and on screen he seemed unstoppable, anchoring hits like Forgetting Sarah Marshall and Get Him to the Greek with a flamboyant persona that made him both adored and divisive. To many he was the thrilling, eccentric export, witty, sharp, and deliciously unpredictable. But the wildness began to look less like performance and more like pattern. Over time, allegations accumulated of predatory conduct, emotional coercion, and sensitive matters wrongdoing. In 2023, an investigation brought multiple women's accounts into the open, painting a picture of control dressed up as spiritual awakening. The man who billed himself a guru of honesty suddenly found himself at the center of a major public reckoning. The consequences were swift and severe. Broadcasters and publishers pulled away, online audiences fractured, and his once celebrated cultural commentary lost credibility. What had been read as insight increasingly sounded like rationalization, a voice trying to recast abuse as enlightenment. Now he survives outside the mainstream spotlight, insisting he is misunderstood. For a great many observers, though, the label has changed. No longer merely an eccentric entertainer or provocative thinker, but someone whose magnetism was used to mask harm. 22. Reese Witherspoon. Reese Witherspoon built a career that felt immaculately curated. From Legally Blonde to Walk the Line, she was cast as America's charming, clever heroine, polished, ambitious, and endlessly marketable. She parlayed that stardom into producing, championing women's stories through her company Hello Sunshine and reshaping her image from actress to industry leader. For a long stretch, she seemed above the fray, a sincere face of empowerment amid Hollywood gloss. Then the narrative shifted. Accounts from sets painted a different picture, demanding, icy, and difficult to work with. The carefully constructed message of solidarity with women began to look like a crafted brand rather than a lived ethic. When old footage of her intoxicated and lashing out at an officer circulated online, doubters felt vindicated. The perfection was performative. Supporters still point to her achievements and influence. Critics see her as part of the same hardened establishment she once critiqued. She retains power and talent, but her image is now complicated, admired, scrutinized, and no longer untouchable. 21. Chrissy Teigen. Chrissy Teigen rose from runway model to social media phenomenon by trading glamour for approachability. Funny, candid, and seemingly down-to-earth, she turned her wit and a best-selling cookbook into a brand built on accessibility. Fans loved her as the celebrity who felt like a neighbor, proof that fame could be familiar and fun. That image unraveled when archived posts re-emerged messages that revealed mean-spirited jokes, body-shaming, and harassment aimed at other women in the business. A particularly troubling exchange showed her pressuring a young reality star to harm herself. The same online audience that had cheered her now reacted with outrage and disgust. The platform that made her famous recast her as a villain. Apologies followed, but they failed to stem the fallout. Endorsements dried up, television opportunities evaporated, and many questioned the sincerity of her contrition. She still posts and speaks publicly, yet the easy glow is dimmer. Once an emblem of modern authenticity, she has been recast as a cautionary example of how influence can corrupt the promise of empathy. 20. Nicki Minaj. Once the most electrifying presence in popular music, Nicki Minaj transformed what a female rapper could be with incendiary delivery and a flamboyant persona. Her bars, swagger, and unapologetic showmanship from Superbass to Anaconda made her a global phenomenon, and fans crowned her queen. But stardom also brought endless friction. Her rise became shadowed by headline feuds with peers like Cardi B, Miley Cyrus, and Megan Thee Stallion, and the boldness that once felt empowering sometimes read as vindictive. Controversies mounted. Public defenses of her partner's troubled past, abrasive exchanges online, and dismissive responses to serious accusations that demanded empathy. Each clash cost her goodwill. Followers peeled away, critics sharpened their critiques, and social media branded her as combative. Rather than soften, she often doubled down, choosing confrontation over conciliation. She still draws attention, but for many the trailblazing energy that once inspired now looks tarnished by choices that burned bridges. 19. Ariana Grande. Ariana Grande rose from child star to pop phenomenon, a powerhouse voice wrapped in sweetness and charisma. From Nickelodeon days to blockbuster singles like Thank You, Next, and 7 Rings, she came to personify a certain era of pop, innocent yet suggestive, relatable yet untouchable. For a long time, she was Hollywood's favorite, the small girl with the enormous voice who seemed incapable of misstep. But behind the signature ponytail, fissures began to appear. Whispered stories of diva demands, public spats with collaborators, and an increasing air of distance recast her image from approachable to aloof. The shift intensified when a highly publicized romance exploded across social media, flipping her narrative almost overnight and turning sympathy into scrutiny. The reaction was swift and severe. Once defending fans went quiet, memes and hot takes proliferated, and people started reassessing everything they admired about her. Her restraint, once interpreted as grace, began to read as coldness. Every update looked staged, every smile measured a carefully maintained brand, desperate to remain cherished. She still fills arenas and tops the charts, but her public persona has become more divisive. Revered for a blend of vulnerability and talent, she is now for many emblematic of an industry that polishes sweetness until it becomes a liability. Her voice is as flawless as ever her reputation, much less so. 18. James Franco. James Franco once embodied everything Hollywood admired: intellect, artistry, and boundless ambition. He was the golden boy who seemed to do it all: act, direct, write, and even teach. With lauded turns in 127 Hours, Pineapple Express, and The Disaster Artist, he collected critical plaudits and a kind of cult admiration, appearing able to straddle mainstream fame and intellectual cachet, as comfortable on red carpets as in classrooms. But that sheen concealed a darker turn. Over time, multiple women, including several who had been his students, came forward with allegations of sensitive matters, misconduct, manipulation, and exploitation. They painted a picture of someone who blurred professional and personal boundaries under the guise of artistic mentoring, using status and access in ways others described as coercive rather than inspiring. The artist who once railed against Hollywood hypocrisy increasingly looked like an embodiment of it. The fallout was swift and severe. Collaborators distanced themselves, studios severed ties, and projects evaporated. Even longtime allies publicly stepped back. Franco's prolonged silence only intensified the outrage. Once touted as a fearless innovator, his reputation is now deeply fractured, a reminder that talent and intellect cannot excuse a loss of integrity, and that a reach for mastery can end in self-inflicted ruin. 17. Cara Delevingne. Once hailed as the face of a new generation, she brought bold brows, effortless swagger, and a rebellious spirit that helped redefine modeling in the 21st century. She ruled runways, crossed over into films such as Personal Despair Squad, and became a fashion icon celebrated for breaking rules and mocking expectations. To admirers, she was the girl who did not care, and that carelessness was part of her appeal. But behind the grin there were signs of trouble. Wild nights, erratic public appearances, and sudden absences from events began to alarm fans and friends. Circulating clips of unsteady moments on red carpets and in airports fueled speculation about substance use and mental health struggles, turning casual concern into tabloid fodder. Praise gave way to pity, mockery, worry, and then weariness. The industry moved on, some brands stepped back, and an image that once felt electric was reduced to a cautionary headline. She remains talented and complex, yet her trajectory highlights how thin the line can be between celebrated rebellion and self-harm when fame burns too fiercely. 16. Lady Gaga. She climbed from relative anonymity to become a defining force in pop culture, thanks to anthems like Poker Face and Bad Romance, and a stage persona that rewrote the rules for how a woman in music could present herself. More than a vocalist, she fashioned a theatrical identity sequence, shock and spectacle, turned into a form of art that made vulnerability feel cinematic. For a time she seemed untouchable, the personification of fearless creativity. Yet the same intensity that propelled her success also complicated her public image. As her fame expanded, eccentricity for some observers slid into excess. What began as earnest advocacy for equality and social causes prompted accusations from critics that activism had become part of the show. Rumors about offstage behavior and claims of diva demands attached themselves to her narrative. High-profile alliances and the recurrent use of provocative religious imagery further alienated portions of the audience. The response hardened with each metamorphosis. To admirers, a restless genius constantly reinventing pop; to detractors, a calculated performer mistaking shock for substance. She remains one of entertainment's most gifted and divisive figures, a star whose theatrical brilliance and polarizing choices prove how complicated authenticity can become under intense scrutiny. 15. Lizzo. Lizzo burst into the spotlight like a shot of pure joy. Her advocacy for body positivity, self-love, and empowerment quickly made her more than a pop act. She became a cultural force. With songs such as Truth Hurts and Good as Hell, she was embraced as an emblem of authenticity in an industry that prizes perfection, a performer unafraid to claim space loudly and proudly. Then everything shifted. In the year 2023, a lawsuit brought by members of her touring troupe alleged sensitive matters, harassment, body shaming, and a hostile workplace allegations that cut straight through the very values she had championed. The contradiction was striking. The glow of her public persona suddenly looked fragile. The reaction was immediate and often unforgiving. Admirers called her out as a hypocrite, endorsement deals were put on hold, and lines she had long used about empowerment were replayed in a far colder tone. Attempts to rebut the claims only seemed to widen the fissures in public perception. She still retains her voice, her craft, and a platform that few achieve, but the trust that once buoyed her image has been wounded. Once celebrated as a beacon of joy and inclusion, she now stands as a reminder that celebrity narratives can unravel, and that even triumphant anthems of self-love can conceal unsettling contradictions. 14. Johnny Depp. He once embodied Hollywood's charming outsider, the oddball heartthrob who refused to conform. From the fragile poet in Edward Scissorhands to the swaggering pirate of the Caribbean, he carved a career out of odd beauty and theatrical risk, becoming for many the last great movie star. Unpredictable, magnetic, untamed, everything shifted when his private life was dragged into public courtrooms. A protracted and bitter legal conflict with Amber Heard exposed alleged violence, substance issues, and manipulation, turning intimate battles into a global spectacle. Devoted followers fractured into rival factions, some insisting he was the injured party, others convinced he was culpable, and the debate took on the tone of a cultural civil war. Even legal outcomes did little to settle opinion. For some, The rulings represented vindication. For others, the proceedings only proved how well performance can sway a jury and an audience. The mystique of the tortured artist curdled for many into something darker, a figure who seemed to revel in being enigmatic, even as that mystique destroyed parts of his public life. Today, he is still a cinematic force, but a compromised one. His movies carry new weight, read not just as art, but as pieces in an ongoing argument about celebrity, accountability, and how fame transforms private pain into relentless public theater. 13. Will Smith. For years he was Hollywood's golden child, charismatic, funny, and seemingly untouchable. From a breakout sitcom about a streetwise teenager to summer blockbusters such as Men in Black and Independence Day, he crafted a near-flawless reputation as a bankable star and a model of charm and humility. He carried an aura of grace in an industry known for scandals. Then, everything changed. At the Oscars, in front of a global audience, he walked on stage and struck a comedian after a joke about his wife. That public act undercut his carefully curated image and erased much of the goodwill he had accumulated. The reaction was swift and unforgiving. The Academy imposed sanctions, projects were put on hold, and his heartfelt apology did little to settle the controversy. Supporters and critics alike found themselves divided. Some saw a human moment, others saw a breach of trust. He is still undeniably gifted, but his smile now comes with a complicated aftertaste. His fall illustrates how a single impulsive act can reshape a legacy built over decades. 12. Jared Fogle. He was never a Hollywood leading man, but he became a national face, the Subway guy who touted a simple sandwich diet and turned into an unlikely emblem of everyday success. His ads and interviews played everywhere, turning a private weight loss story into a commercial phenomenon and a feel-good marketing triumph. Then the public discovered a far darker reality. He was convicted of possessing child pornography and of sexually exploiting minors, a revelation that destroyed the trust viewers had placed in him. The cheerful grin that once sold sandwiches was recast as a disturbing symbol of betrayal. The response was swift and unforgiving. The sandwich chain scrubbed him from its history. Corporate partners, severed relationships, and ordinary people reacted with shock and revulsion. Now incarcerated, his name is widely associated with deceit and abuse, a stark example of how charisma can mask monstrous behavior. 11. Armie Hammer. Armie Hammer once looked like a modern-day aristocrat, tall, poised, and impossibly photogenic. He broke through in the social network and won broad acclaim for "Call Me by Your Name," and many assumed he would become a major leading man, blending old-fashioned refinement with contemporary sex appeal. That carefully curated persona, however, came apart in the most unsettling fashion. In the year 2021, leaked messages surfaced describing fantasies of violence, domination, and even cannibalism. Several women publicly accused him of manipulation, coercion, and abuse, and the revelations turned the press spotlight from admiration to revulsion. The industry responded quickly. Studios cut ties, representatives distanced themselves, and projects were quietly shelved. What had been promise and prestige was consumed by scandal, and the actor who once embodied glamour became a cautionary example of how fame can collapse into disgrace. Today his name carries a haunted aftertaste, an abrupt and total fall from grace. 10. Kanye West. Once legally known as Ye, Kanye West once set the beat for modern music. His albums changed the sound of hip-hop. His fashion endeavors pushed aesthetics into new territory, and his relentless self-confidence gave him an almost messianic public image. He was more than a performer. He became a cultural force who convinced many that he was reshaping how we think about art. But brilliance and volatility often travel together, and his public life grew increasingly marked by meltdowns, headline feuds, and erratic interviews. That trajectory darkened further when he made a string of anti-Semitic remarks and promoted conspiracy ideas, shocking fans and colleagues alike. The consequences were dramatic. Major partners, From large sportswear labels to luxury houses like Adidas and Balenciaga, cut ties, shows were cancelled, and once lucrative deals disappeared, leaving a creative giant whose influence is now shadowed by the damage of his own actions. 9. Marilyn Manson. For years he was presented as the sovereign of shock, a performer who blurred theater and provocation with leather, makeup, and theatrical menace. His image became shorthand for rebellion and outrage, the figure parents warned about and the tabloids could not stop covering. Then, in 2021, several women, including actress Evan Rachel Wood, came forward with accusations of sensitive matters, abuse, emotional cruelty, and manipulative control, describing relationships marked by humiliation and fear. The allegations prompted a rapid industry retreat. Record companies and agents severed ties and credits, and publicists sought distance, while his public responses leaned toward denial and obfuscation rather than contrition. What began as crafted outrage now reads, for many, as a darker reality, the moment when a persona built on horror stopped feeling like performance and started to look like harm. 8. Elliot Page. Elliot Page's rise began as one of the brightest hopes in the film world. After his breakthrough in Juno, he was praised for a raw honesty and an unconventional presence on screen. Smart, outspoken, and willing to take creative risks, he became a rare symbol of authenticity in an industry built on carefully curated images. When he publicly came out as trans and adopted the name Elliot Page, initial support from peers and fans was unmistakable, but the reaction was not uniform. Some former admirers accused him of hypocrisy and suggested he was leveraging personal struggle for visibility. Others dismissed his political engagement as performative, while a vocal fringe seized on his transition to argue that the industry was in moral decline. What should have been a private journey became a public battleground. Instead of being widely celebrated for courage, Page became a polarizing figure, adored by some, attacked by others, and caught in a broader cultural conflict he never sought. His story now stands as a reminder of a harsh truth about modern celebrity. Sincerity can be turned into ammunition when the public demands heroes and then punishes them for being human. 7. Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey once occupied Hollywood's uppermost heights. With indelible turns in American Beauty, The Usual Suspects, and the political phenomenon House of Cards, he was hailed for his command, charm, and emotional range. He was more than a great actor. He was a symbol of prestige and influence. That image shattered at the height of the Me Too movement, when dozens of men came forward accusing him of sensitive matters, misconduct, assault, and predation, with some alleging they were underage when the incidents occurred. The accounts painted a portrait of a man who preyed on the vulnerable while cloaked in respectability, transforming a revered figure into a focal point of scandal. The consequences were swift and severe. Streaming partners cut ties, projects were altered to excise his presence, and he disappeared from the mainstream almost immediately. His odd theatrical online videos, played in the persona of Frank Underwood, only intensified the revulsion performance, blurring into something darker. What had been a celebrated career ended in public disgrace and exile. Today, his name often evokes manipulation and corruption. A performer once applauded for portraying monsters ultimately found himself cast as one, a stark and bitter irony at the heart of Hollywood. 6. Britney Spears. She rose as pop's golden child, the voice of a generation, propelled by early hits like Baby One More Time and Toxic that made her a cultural force. The press anointed her America's sweetheart, and fans saw innocence wrapped in sequins and melody. But fame does not protect innocence. It consumes it. Relentless scrutiny, very public breakdowns, and a conservatorship controlled by her father turned her life into ongoing spectacle. For 13 years, her money, movements, and personal autonomy were governed by others. When the Free Britney movement exposed the extent of that control, the world recoiled at how the system had failed her. Freedom arrived, but not peace. Her social media, often raw, unpredictable, unsettling, left people divided between sympathy and unease. To many, she is a survivor. To some, she is a cautionary figure. Britney remains both icon and warning. Hollywood will exalt you until you fracture, then sell your fracture back to the public. 5. Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson was not just a pop star. He became a cultural earthquake, remaking how music looked, sounded, and moved. From Thriller to Bad, he turned concerts into theater and choreography into shorthand for global fandom. To many, he embodied eternal youth and limitless imagination, the orphaned prodigy, who built a fantastical retreat in search of refuge from a world that both worshipped and consumed him. Yet beneath the sequined gloves and gravity-defying steps lay a far darker narrative. Allegations of child abuse began to surface in the 1990s and only intensified over the following decades. Though he was cleared in court, the publication of Leaving Neverland years after his death reopened wounds with harrowing accounts from men who claimed they were groomed as children. The revelations forced a painful reckoning about the man behind the myth. The split in public feeling was profound. Some continued to defend the purity of his artistry, others could not separate the music from the accusations. His name became a moral fault-line genius, and monster insisting on the same living body. Michael Jackson's legacy hangs between brilliance and betrayal, a towering influence that also carries an enduring, tragic ambiguity. The child who wanted to fly and wound up trapped in his own enchanted kingdom. 4. Angelina Jolie. Angelina Jolie once personified both glamour and defiance. With her distinctive tattoos, mercurial public persona, and magnetic turns in Girl, Interrupted, and Mr. and Mrs. Smith, she became the most talked-about actress of her era. Admirers saw her as a symbol of liberation, bold, raw, and unpredictable. She later recast herself as a humanitarian, serving as a United Nations envoy and raising a widely noticed international family. For a long time, she seemed almost mythic, alternately revered and vilified. Fame built on intensity, however, can be brittle. Her marriage and subsequent split from Brad Pitt, once hailed as Hollywood royalty, descended into a brutal public fight marked by leaks, courtroom filings, and conflicting narratives. Reports and allegations about abuse and manipulation splintered her carefully managed image. Some defended her as a protective parent, others portrayed her as strategic in her use of sympathy. Every photograph, statement, and legal paper became grist for the tabloids. The episode left the industry polarized. Friends and collaborators picked sides, and the press turned every setback into spectacle. Her humanitarian work lost some of its sheen, and even moments of quiet were read as calculated. She remains a powerful figure, but the arc of her story now reads less like a clean triumph and more like a complicated legend coming apart at the seams. 3. Madonna. For decades, she was the blueprint for pop rebellion, daring, brilliant, and seemingly invincible. From Like a Virgin to Ray of Light, Madonna kept reinventing herself, turning outrage into aesthetic and provocation into influence. She did not simply ride cultural waves, she helped make them, forcing the public to confront new ideas about sex, faith, and fame. At her peak, she was a raw, magnetic force who set the tempo for an industry. But even legends age. In later years, her quest to remain a cultural lightning rod sometimes edged into desperation, provocative social posts, visible cosmetic procedures, and on-stage and off-stage tirades that left admirers unsure whether they were witnessing performance or a personal unraveling. The stubborn refusal to accept fading youth, once framed as empowerment, began to feel troubling. Critics accused her of mistaking shock for substance, and social feeds turned her into a target for ridicule about appearance and tone. Still, she never lost the ability to command attention. Her story is equal parts triumph and warning, a transformative artist who changed the rules of pop and a cautionary example of how relentless fame can erode the very image it once elevated. 2. Tom Cruise. He was Hollywood's most perfect product, handsome, disciplined, fearless. From Top Gun to the Mission Impossible films, he embodied the American action hero, performing his own stunts and owning the screen with razor focus. Audiences admired his control, his intensity, his relentless professionalism. For years he stood as the golden standard of stardom. No public scandals, no messy personal life, just pure movie craft. Then the mask began to slip. A zealous devotion to Scientology, strange outbursts on talk shows, and disturbing testimonies from former church members fractured that spotless image. The much-discussed leap onto a daytime couch, once treated as a quirky moment, came to symbolize something more troubling: a performer consumed by belief, caught inside the machinery he helped power. People who once applauded his certainty started to see fanaticism. Even as his box office appeal persisted, rumors of control, family estrangement, and indoctrination followed. Critics painted him as the embodiment of Hollywood's hunger for perfection, mechanical, overly rehearsed, emotionally distant. Every smile seemed staged, every line felt scripted. He remains a peerless star, yet his legacy carries a chill of detachment. He is both idol and mystery, the man who seemed to defy gravity on screen, only to lose his footing off it. Hollywood's last great movie god and its most unsettling believer. 1. Kim Kardashian. Kim Kardashian was not simply found by fame, she was carefully constructed. A private scandal that leaked became the cornerstone of a vast, billion-dollar empire. Through Keeping Up with the Kardashians, she turned reality television into ritual, converting her family's intimate turmoil into the most lucrative soap opera imaginable. She did more than play the fame game. She changed its rules, teaching a generation that visibility often mattered more than craft, that brilliance carried corrosion. Critics named her the emblem of everything hollow in contemporary celebrity, the person who packaged feeling, orchestrated conflict, and made performative self-love aspirational. Every romance, every heartbreak, every cosmetic shift was repackaged as content. Her brand expanded as her credibility eroded, until even moments of tenderness read like calculated moves. The backlash itself became part of the spectacle. She was derided as vapid, accused of cultural appropriation, and faulted for helping foster a culture obsessed with filters and facades. And yet each controversy seemed to bolster her balance sheet outrage, becoming, paradoxically, another revenue stream. Over time, she stopped feeling like an individual and started to feel like an algorithm made flesh. Now she stands both untouchable and reviled, monarch of an attention economy built on contradiction. To some, she is a shrewd entrepreneur. To others, she is a symptom of cultural decay. Either way, she is Hollywood's most loathed triumph, proof that in this era, notoriety can be mistaken for permanence. Hollywood has never been merely a dream factory. It is a mirror reflecting what we exalt and what we scorn. These stories are not merely about stardom, but about hunger, the desire to be adored, to be remembered, to be anything but ordinary. In that appetite, the boundary between creation and destruction blurs. For every luminous star, a shadow lengthens. The industry that fashions gods will always require figures to burn. The crowd cheers, the lights dim, and another name slips into the ledger. In Hollywood, hatred is simply another currency of attention, and attention endures. Hollywood has never been merely a dream factory. It has always been a mirror, holding up everything we worship and everything we despise. These are not stories of triumph, but of appetite, the aching to be adored, to be remembered, to be anything but ordinary. In that appetite, the line between making and destroying dissolves. For every light that climbs, a shadow lengthens behind it. The machinery that exalts idols will always need someone to blame, someone to burn. The audience applauds, the lights dim, and another name drifts into the book of infamy. The camera pulls back. Hatred here becomes another form of attention, and attention, more than fame or fortune, is the only thing that outlives us.